early in the morning at 1 o'clock, Tara and Laszlo were driving from the Berlin airport towards Friedensau. And Tara and Laszlo, they had a big problem. How to keep me awake. So it was very interesting to witness how a practical theologian think and how a theologian think. Tara came up with the idea to give me a piece of dark chocolate. So I took it, but Laszlo was at my right. He said, I have to keep Daniel still awake, and he said, how I can keep him awake? And he suggested a topic about the book of Revelation. Do you know what was the result? I missed 2 exits. So when you start to speak about what you have so passionate about, then the time is flying and we arrived safely at Friedensau finally. In this morning we see 2 topics that Tara was passionate about, discipleship and spiritual formation, and also Laszlo was presenting about the delay of parousia. And he was so passionate that missed the exit in the way that we are now a little bit behind the schedule. But, okay. It's not his fault. Okay. So that's perfect. We will finish at 12 o'clock. And the purpose of my presentation today is to introduce a topic that you'll hear about this week, about sanctuary. And I will talk about the centrality of sanctuary in the Old Testament. I will discuss first a few introductory aspects, and the first one relates to our history. You know, as Seventh-day Adventists, we came to be interested in the topic of the sanctuary, digging into the book of Daniel. So William Miller, when he studied the book of Daniel, he was so passionate about the longest chronoprophetic prophecy that Daniel 8:14 was for him the main aspect. And while studying this prophecy, he was arriving at the sanctuary, or he was arriving into the first books of the Bible, which is Torah. So the hermeneutical trajectory is tantamount to reading the Old Testament in the opposite direction, from writings to Torah. This is our purpose today. What it will happen if we just open the Bible and we start with the first books of the Bible and not taking a book from the writings, as it is now assigned, the book of Daniel, into the writings. And what it will happen if we just open the Bible and we just start reading in the Pentateuch, in the first 5 books of Moses. Is sanctuary a central topic there? This is the main focus of my presentation today. And I feel that there is a need towards a natural hermeneutical trajectory. I have, as you know, the Bible is divided into 3 parts. The first part is Torah. The second are the historical books and prophetical books. And the third part it's putting together, gathering all the books of writing, or sapiential books. Now, the book of Daniel is in the book of writings according to the Jewish canon. But it's very interesting that when you look at the earliest evidence about this book, you find the book of Daniel assigned before Christ to the prophetical section of the canon. For instance, we have evidence in Qumran that they quote the book of Daniel as Daniel the prophet. It was the same formula that they used to refer to Isaiah or Jeremiah's books. Then we have Jesus. When he's referring to the book of Daniel, he's referring as a prophetical book, as Daniel the prophet. Also Josephus, in the 1st century AD, he was referring to Daniel as a prophetical book. He even goes beyond and says that Daniel is the greater among the prophets. But what did happen? How did Daniel came to be assigned to the section of writings? It is because there was a big debate between Christians and Jews. Christians, they show that in the book of Daniel you have their Messiah. And to downgrade the force of the argument, the rabbis at that time, they reassigned the book into the writings because they believed that Torah is the main section and writings, it's somehow not at the same importance. Even Jewish scholars today, they think that Torah, according to the textual evidence, it's a stabilized text before Christ, a few centuries earlier. There are no many variations in manuscripts. While about the writings, they don't have the same view. So, if we read the Bible from the Torah, what is considered the highest revelation, do we have sanctuary as a central teaching there? The second remark that I want to bring is about sanctuary ritual. When you talk about rituals at the sanctuary, perhaps the best verse that I find for myself to encapsulate, to put all the parts of the ritual together, is that in 1 Peter 2, verses 4 and 5. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering a spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. What are the main parts of the sanctuary ritual? We have the building itself, the structure. We have the cultic personnel, priests, and also we have sacrifices. The third aspect that I want to refer here is the content of my presentation. And I will discuss in the first part about the macro structure of Pentateuch. In the second part, we'll discuss about the geography of Pentateuch, then chronology of Pentateuch, and ritual accumulation. We'll take all of this one by one. When we discuss about how do we structure a book, we have to figure out the principle behind. If we single it out correctly, then we can arrive to better results. When we discuss about each individual book in the Pentateuch, then each book has its own characteristics. We'll go now to the book of Genesis. And when we refer to the book of Genesis, it contains two main parts. The first part, which we call it primeval history, regards with the story of Adam and mainly the story of Noah. We know that Adam was created and had from God a commandment to fill in the earth, to multiply, and to exert dominion over this earth. And things went wrong. And when we have Noah, he is portrayed in the book of Genesis as the second Adam. And then he received the same commandment from God to multiply, and we have lots of images and language that connects the creation story with Noah's story. And in the book of Exodus, the two characters are the main in the first section. In the second part of the book of Genesis, we have the history of patriarchs. And mainly, we have three stories. Those stories are that of Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph. It is very interesting, though, that the book of Exodus contains also another underlying principle, putting together generations of people or stories of those generations of people. And the key element or the key word is toldot. These are the generations of. We have 6 toldots in the first unit, we have 5 in the second part of the book of Genesis. But what is interesting is that when it's the toldot of Abraham, for instance, it's more there in the background, the issue about having a son, his son. When I have, for instance, introduced or said that here is the toldot or the history of Isaac, then the story goes about his son, about Jacob. When finally we are said that since now on we'll hear about the story of Jacob, what we have there more it's about his son, Joseph. Because of that I put Jacob and Joseph here. So, briefly, the book of Genesis has 2 main parts, and the second longest part has 3 main literary units, 3 cycles of stories. We'll move now to the book of Deuteronomy. And to make it simple, I will present the big building blocks that we can discover also in this book. What we noticed as scholars dealing with this book is that it also contained 3 cycles of narrative discourses. The first cycle, it's up to chapter 4. We have the first narrative discourse. The first narrative discourse deals with the history, what had happened in the past of Israel up to the present moment. The second narrative discourse deals with laws and ordinances that Israel received at Sinai. It's recapitulating what was said in the past. And the third narrative discourse has to do with chapters 29 and 30, which is again a renewal. And there the covenant form will come it later, it will appear. So those 3 form the basic structure of the book of Deuteronomy. There is also another part, which is the epilogue. And at the end of the Torah of Pentateuch, we have the song of Moses, we have the blessing of Moses, we have the commission of Joshua as the next leader in Israel, and of course the death of Moses. Together, this is kind of an epilogue to the Pentateuch as a whole. What I suggest as a possible correspondence between these books, Genesis and Deuteronomy, is to see that the first 11 chapters in Genesis to be a grand introduction to everything what happens in Torah, which is balanced with the epilogue, with the concluding aspects, what happened at the end of the life of Moses. And then formally, Genesis 12:15, we have the story of the 3 patriarchs presented, inspired by the 3 narrative discourses in the book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Genesis, we have this focus on generations, and now in Deuteronomy, you have the focus on the last generation that is now to enter into the land of Canaan. We move on. We now go to the book of Exodus, which now here the principle behind its structure differs. And I suggest that this book is better understood or visualized when we look at it considering the geography. We have, in the first 15 chapters, Israel's story that departs from Egypt into the wilderness. They arrived in chapter 15 at Red Sea, and once Egyptians are dying there, they are free, and they start a new chapter. Their next chapter is formed by from Exodus 15 to 18, and we have their grumbling and quarreling in the desert. They are on a journey, and that journey took them into the desert. And at the end of the book, we have Israel camped at Sinai. And there they receive the covenant, they enter into a formal covenant with God, and they received laws. And the book ends with an important section of the book covers with laws about the tent of meeting. When we move at the book of Numbers, we see here two principles at work. One connects with the censuses that this book records. From here, the title, Numbers. And the other is geography. So keeping to this principle in mind, we can briefly refer to the book of Numbers as being, in the first part, a census of the first generation. And we have here preparation for departure. And it focuses how now Israel from Sinai, they move forward into the future. They have specific laws, how to move forward. Numbers 10 to 21, they are quarreling and they rebel in the desert. And at the end of this unit, we have the episode about Balak and Balaam. And at the end of the book of Numbers, we have the census of the second generation, and then followed by laws regarding how should they appropriate the promised land. It is important to see now a connection that exists between the book of Numbers and the book of Exodus, which I call again structural correspondence. For instance, if we compare the material in Exodus 19 to 40, where we have the commandments about the building of the tabernacle, you see language and themes that goes and put in parallel with Numbers 1 and 10. In Exodus, you have the building of the sanctuary. In the book of Numbers 1 to 10, you have instruction how to transport the tabernacle and how to keep the tabernacle among them. It is very interesting, if you didn't pay attention, but Moses and his father-in-law, it's right before Sinai. And when they leave Sinai, you have again a meeting between Moses and his father-in-law. You have in both sides the same theme. They are in the desert, but they still grumbling, they are complaining, rebelling. They are not happy there. And many locations between those two parts in Exodus and Numbers, they are quite the same also. And there is an interesting connection that a famous theologian showed up. It's Seilhammer, about the first chapters of the book of Exodus and the episode about Balak and Balaam. What are the connections here? For instance, in both episodes, you have two great kings troubled that Israel became Am Gadol, a big nation, and they take measures for that. Pharaoh had 3 attempts to stop Israel to multiply. So did Balak. He had 3 attempts and invited Balaam to curse Israel. And in the case of Pharaoh, we have the slave masters, the first attempt to oppress the Israelites. We have midwives to kill the baby boys, and finally the decree that every male boy to be thrown into the Nile. And there is even a further connection. After the 3 attempts, we hear that God succeeded to transform the evil into good. In the case of Pharaoh, we have introduced the deliverer. We have Moses introduced there. In the case of Balaam and Balak, we have that the 4th discourse of Balaam, it's about the star that is rising from Jacob. He will be the future deliverer of Israel. And both units here in Exodus 1:15 and Numbers 22:25 are connected by another key or catching word, which is based on the root kavad, to harden or to give glory. In the case of Pharaoh, we have that his heart hardened. In the case of Balaam, he was promised kavod, the same root, a lot of glory. So, according to this structure, we see that the center of the Pentateuch is the book of Leviticus. And if I will show you a more detailed structure, and you'll have this handout provided to the organizers, if you want to have it, you can see that in the middle of the Pentateuch is the book of Exodus. Is the book of Leviticus, sorry for that. But we move forward. When we discuss about the structure of Leviticus, an important theologian, William Shea, presented that the Day of Atonement, it's in the middle of the book of Leviticus. In other words, there is a center of the center. And he put it there that the cultic legislation is balanced at the end with cultic legislation, and priestly history is balanced in the other section of Leviticus with priestly legislation, and personal laws of uncleanness is balanced with personal moral laws. And at the end, you have the Day of Atonement. But if we go to Leviticus 16, we see here another coherent structure suggested by Alberto Treyer, in which she puts that the center of Leviticus 16 is when the narrator presents the 2 goats there, which for us as a Seventh-day Adventists, it tells a lot, which they too points to the great controversy between the good and evil. According to the structure of the book of the structure of Pentateuch, we see that sanctuary material is placed into central position, and for that we looked at the structure of the Pentateuch. But now the question is if there are other evidence to go into the same direction, to see if indeed sanctuary is at the heart of Torah. And we look now at geography. And in the primeval history, we have Genesis 1 and 11. The narrative moves with the history of the patriarchs that they spend their lives as wanderers in the land of Canaan. Now, a great famine comes, and they move into another geographical location. They move and settle in Goshen. They were pasturing place there. They have lots of cattle and sheep. After they are coming out, the location changes, and they are now in the wilderness. And after they go through the wilderness, we see them camped at Sinai. Now it's a mountain. If we move forward into the narrative, we see again the presence of the wilderness. People go through the wilderness towards the promised land. And they arrived at the end of the Torah in the plains of Moab, which is a good place where to stay before crossing the Jordan. As we see in this slide, is that the Mount on Sinai, it's at the center. And the Mount of Sinai narratives, which comprises ritual and sanctuary material, it's bracketed by wilderness geographical locations. And then you have plains of Goshen, where they are with the sheep and the cattle, which parallels with plains of Moab. And further, we can add that their wanderings into the land of Canaan at the beginning is paralleled with taking the land of Canaan at the end through Joshua. So when we look at the geography, we have an emphasis on the Sinai material. What is there? It's the greatest revelation of God. God is coming down and he wants to have a bond with the people. We now move forward and to look for other evidences if indeed the sanctuary material is central in Pentateuch. And I present evidences from chronology. And we have in the first chapters of Genesis some information about how long those 11 chapters covered from the human history. And there is a principle in narrative studies that when you have the time shortened, but the narrative expanded, there is an emphasis. What do I mean by that? There is a famous example in the book of Samuel, at the end, the first book of Samuel. You have that the time stops on the last days of Saul, lives of Saul. And here the narrator takes time to tell what had happened before the crucial battle with the Philistines at the end of the book. And in those 3-4 days that the material cover, for the narrator it's important to take time to tell and to point that David is not involved in that war, even though he was on the way towards that war. The principle is this: when you want to emphasize something as a narrator, you have to make the time to stop, but the narrative to expand. Applying this principle, when you go to primeval history, we have Genesis 5 and 11, two genealogies that provide us some valuable information about, in general terms, how many years those 11 chapters covered. In Genesis 5, we have their specific focus. People live very long, 900 more years. But in each case, we have repeated the same sentence. People died, and again, 10 times they died. When you look in genealogies of Genesis 11, you don't have people there dying, because the genealogy has another literary function. There people are multiplying, and they're fulfilling the command that God gave them to fill in the world, the command that they received after the flood. So in Genesis 15 and 11, besides giving some chronological information about how long those chapters covered, they also they have literally different functions. When you put together, those chapters cover approximately 2,000 years. So 11 chapters for 2,000 years. Let's go to the next stage, to the history of the patriarchs. And based on Genesis 15:13 and Exodus 12:40, we see that those chapters cover a period of 400 or 430, depends from where you count. But again, you have from Genesis 12 up to Exodus 15, you have a long material covering more than 400 years. When we move towards the wilderness, we figure out that in Exodus 19:1, it is telling us that they spent from the Red Sea, they went out from the Red Sea up to the mountain 3 months. And now let's see what happens in the next. They arrive at Sinai, and in Exodus, at the book of Exodus 40, verse 2 and 17, we have 9 months covered. And in Numbers 1:1, which it's a key to understand how much time was between building of the sanctuary and the beginning of Numbers, it is telling us that Leviticus 1 to 27, it took 1 month. The time is shortening. The material, it's expanding. Preparations from Sinai, based on references in the book of Numbers 10:11, we figure out that they spend 20 days. And in the wilderness, how did they spend up to the end of the book of Exodus, up to the end of the book of Deuteronomy? We have that they spent 40 years. So if we look where the material expands and where the time shortens, then the focus, it is there at Sinai and connects with sanctuary material. 10 months, 20 days, 58 chapters. And if I will portray it differently, you can see on this graph how many words you have in the Masoretic text for each of those units. In Genesis 1:11, you have 5,400 and something words. And then if you look at the center, those 10 months and 20 days, 58 chapters, it is the longest. The shortest time, the longest material. And what is the point of this? Is that sanctuary material in the Torah, it occupies a central place. So we have seen the structure of the Torah. We have seen the geography of the Torah. We have now pointed out that chronology of the Torah points into the same direction. We'll move now to discuss about ritual accumulation. What do I mean by that? Very early in my life, I was blessed by a book. I was a BA student in Cernica in Romania, having a very small library. At that time, it was very small. Now it got better. But in that small library, I found out a book, and that book was about the covenant structure, which was written by George Mendenhall, Law and Covenant in Israel and in Ancient Near East. Why it's important? Because reading lots of introductions into the Old Testament and other books, I saw that many authors are quoting this book. And by the way, it's very, very short, 50 pages, as a proof that you don't need to write long to be quoted much right? So I had this book, and it was a real blessing. I checked if this book is in the Freedom Cell library. It is not. So for the host to feel better, including myself, there is not neither in the Cologne library, for instance. So to have in that small book library, it was very, very interesting, and I was grateful for that. What is the point of this book? This book showed that Israel covenant with God has correspondences in the last part of the second millennium BCE treaties that we were doing between suzerain kings and vassal kings. And he pointed out that the covenant, the Hittite treaties or covenants, they had specific parts. The first part regarded the preamble, or the title of the king. I am the great king of Uruk or other cities. And after that, the treaties followed another section, historical prologue, where the great deeds of the suzerain was presented, the mighty acts of the great king. Then, the treaties included stipulations, basic and detailed obligation of the vassal, and further provisions for storing and for reading of the tablets. And then witnesses. They invited gods to be witness in this agreement that they were establishing. Blessings and curses. Formal oath of obedience. People, they had to agree that they will obey the stipulations, and accompanying solemn ceremony. So these formal aspects that we see how a Hittite treaty was made up in the second part of the second millennium before Christ, we have them reflected in the way the covenant between God and people of Israel was made. And there are many passages in the book of in the Torah that reflect those aspects or part of those aspects. For instance, in Exodus 19, as a historical prologue, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. This is what the great suzerain, the great king, was doing for his people that he is now going to enter into a covenant. It is very interesting that here, nasa, which is I bore you, it's a word that is used in rituals with the meaning to carry on sin. When God is carrying us, it's forgiving us. This is what he's doing, what he has done for Israel in the past. And now we have another element of the covenant reflected in verses 5 and 6. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the people. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests. This has to do with the stipulation. What is God wanting from them? If they obey, there will be a kingdom of priests. You have them a formal oath in Exodus 19. And when all people answered as one, saying, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So in this part, they expressed that they want to enter into a covenant. And then we have a special ceremony. So you see here that in Exodus 19, several elements of those treaties are reflected. But there are other parts in the Pentateuch that reflect or incorporate, embeds those aspects of the Hittite treaties. In this book, for instance, you see that the author identifies that Exodus 10:1, I am the Lord your God, is the title of the king presented. And then historical prologue in Exodus 22, that I brought you out of the land of Egypt. The name, then what he has done for the people, and then is coming the stipulations. Where in the book of Exodus you have basic ones, detailed ones, and provision for storing and reading the covenant. We have them presented in Exodus and other books. And witnesses in Israel, they don't have gods, but we have memorial stones that will serve as witness, or they take heaven and earth to witnessing that they entered with God into a covenant. We have blessings and curses in Pentateuch. We have a formal oath of obedience. We have accompanying solemn ceremony presented also in Exodus 24, in the 24th chapter. But even in the book of Deuteronomy, we have patterns like this preserved. For instance, the 3 cycles of narrative discourses that we presented, we can have preamble reflected there, historical prologue, and then in the second part, we have stipulations, blessings and curses, we have acceptance and rejection, and leader succession and provision for storing and for reading of the tablets. Now, what is the main part of this treatise? The main part is when the suzerain, the king, presents the stipulation, what he wants from the people to do. In this regard, Leviticus concentrates or accumulates most of the laws of the covenant that is between God and people. And the centrality of Leviticus in the book of in the Torah is underscored. That is the center of the macro structure of the Torah, and that when we look at the ratio time and narrative extent, we have that the book of Leviticus is the shortest one, but presents there the stipulation. And there are many other ways to test this hypothesis that Leviticus is at the end of the book. So, what do we learn from that? When we read the Bible, not from writings into the Torah, but when we read the Bible from the Torah onwards, we figure out that at the center of Pentateuch is the sanctuary material. Its construction, cultic personnel, and sacrifices are there in the center. And Pentateuch has a center of the center, which is Leviticus. And the center of the center of the center is the great controversy portrayed into the 2 goats that are involved in the Day of Atonement. The material dealing with the 3 elements of the Jewish ritual is extensive and underscores the centrality of the cultic services in Israel's life as a nation. And I suggest that is therefore expected to have sanctuary ritual themes and motifs reoccurring in all the other section of the Hebrew Bible. Because of that, you have all those 3 elements that compose the sanctuary ritual. You have presented in the former prophets, later prophets, and also writings everywhere in the book of Psalms, and not only. Here, Daniel included. And I will close suggesting the sanctuary is central also in New Testament because of one reason, that the foundation of the Jewish Christian world, I would say, is based on the first 5 books of the Torah. They should be called the Gospels of the Old Testament. And the New Testament, you know very well, the centrality of sanctuary in Jesus' ministry. He's related to that. You have there the sanctuary in epistles, when they discuss now what is the connection between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. And then in the book of Revelation, we'll hear there is also sanctuary there. So, even though historically we started from writings to Torah, if we switch the hermeneutical trajectory, we will find that sanctuary is central in the Bible. And this will be a theme that will reoccur again and again over these days. Thank you for your attention, and may God bless everyone.